Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Christina Edwards to talk about fundraising and donor relations. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So, as we're talking about superheroes, I would love to know your superhero origin story.
Oh my goodness. How far back should I take you?
That's up to you.
Here's what comes to mind as we're talking. So, I always find it fascinating when people go to college for the thing that they do in their career. Now, I know that like doctors and lawyers do this, but just the non-doctors and lawyers of the world. So I did not go to college to start a business that helps nonprofits fundraise. I went to college for an arts degree because of course I did. And so I think what I think of as like my hero origin story is that I just kept being curious and kept being creative and kept iterating. And I learned very, very early that I am a creative, yes, but that I am also a little bit of a wild horse and wanted my own thing. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I knew that. And I knew that I was really, really good at helping people see the forest through the trees, helping people feel better, helping people feel motivated. And I wasn't scared or unwilling to do lead gen, to do prospecting, to do outreach. And so I built several businesses. I had a PR and marketing agency. I was in real estate before that. I had side hustles like crazy. And so I was just willing to kind of figure it out as I go. And having that mentality has really, really helped me help my clients.
That's awesome. And then more recently, so how did you actually step into, like, from going from the PR agent to real estate? What was the turn that said nonprofits is really where I want to be?
Yeah. So I was working at a rock venue and I was managing. I started bartending. I started doing everything. This was like college-ish. And I loved it because I loved live music. I loved working with people. And I learned this concept of what we would do for a show if we had low ticket sales. And what we would do is we would call our street team. And our street team was like a physical group of people that would come. We would say, hey, this band is playing, but ticket sales are really low. And they would go to where we knew their audience hung out around town and they would street team. And then we would see a huge influx of ticket sales. So I started learning about sales. I started learning about community building. I started learning about grassroots marketing. And that served me for my next chapter, which I launched a PR and marketing agency. So from there, I got my foot in the door into everything. So I'm based here in Atlanta. It was brick and mortar stores. It was large commercial real estate developments. It was restaurants. It was everything, which meant I got to pick up some nonprofit clients along the way. And when I picked those up, I was like, those are my people. But what I noticed again and again was they were about 10 years behind in their marketing. So their entire marketing strategy, which of course informed their fundraising revenue, was like super slow, super clunky. And I already told you I'm a little bit of a wild horse. So I was like very impatient about it. And ultimately, where I landed was I want to work exclusively with nonprofits. I really want to help them. So I closed the marketing and PR agency, which taught me a lot, which helped me refine all of my methods. I started Splendid Consulting, where I'm at now. And then 2020 was definitely an invitation to scale and go online. So instead of driving to nonprofits and teaching a group of 50 or something like that here, I took the whole thing online. And so that's the work I do now. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. It sounds like a similar, I mean, I didn't do PR agencies or real estate, but the idea of having a few nonprofit clients and then saying, you know what, these are my people, and then just specializing or doubling down on that mix. I mean, it resonates really well with me. So I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, totally. And it got me to see like, how can I adapt? Okay, this company, this for-profit has hundreds of thousands of dollars allocated to their marketing. Okay, I get that the average nonprofit might not have that, but what could we adapt here? What would work? And what would reach donors and prospects faster that they're not doing now? And that is like, oh, that gets me excited. So, yeah.
But it's also good having a wider range because you can apply the principles that you've learned. Like you said, if it's 10 years behind, you don't necessarily need to come up with something new for the nonprofit. You just take what works and more efficiently, especially for the the cost benefit. You find the things that are most effective, most efficient, and you bring those over, maybe with some tweaking, of course. But the idea is that it's transferable, and that is a beautiful thing as well.
Totally.
And so there was the idea of doubling down onto fundraising, especially within the nonprofit space, was because of the ticket sales type of thing. Is that was where you felt you had the most impact, or was it just something that you just naturally gravitated toward?
I would say it was kind of iterating and figuring out what is my methodology, how am I teaching it this, what is working for my clients, and ultimately just going, you guys, marketing and fundraising are best friends. Stop siloing them out, because we're not marketing so that like people just know about your nonprofit and think it's cool. You're marketing to impact. You're marketing to bring in dollars. You're marketing to continue retention. All of those pieces work hand in hand. And so when I started really going, I do both. I am not going to just help you acquire new eyeballs on social media or send really great emails, which I'm very passionate about, and tell really great stories, which I also care deeply about. But I actually don't care about any of that stuff if it's not bringing in more dollars, because more dollars is what helps you impact more. So once I kind of just decided I'm doing both, that's what my group coaching program does. That's where we kind of weave all of those aspects together. Because that's the goal. The goal is like, there are so many consult calls I sit on where I'm like, okay, this is a solvable problem. This is a money problem. Let's bring in some more money, right? Money helps solve this problem very, very quickly. Now, then we start to weave in, this is also a mindset problem. Why aren't you asking for more? And that's when we get into a lot of coaching.
Cool. Let's talk more about then fundraising. And this is kind of a conversation we had in the green room where we both agreed that the fundraising landscape has changed recently. I was wondering if you could start the conversation there. What has changed in the last couple of years? How is it different than it was in the past?
Yeah. So consumer habits have changed. Now, for-profits know this. And they have changed their marketing. They have changed their advertising. They have changed the way they spend money on advertising. By the way, they're partnering with a ton of influencers now and buying less magazine ads and all the like crazy antiquated things that they're doing. So they've adapted to consumer habits changing. And I think one of the mistakes nonprofits make is y'all are all drinking the same Kool-Aid. So we're like, yeah, but we're not them. We're not for profits. So what we do is different. Our strategies are different because we're not selling people a product. I'm like, yes, and your donors and your donor prospects habits have changed too, because the way that they're responding to a Nike ad is different than it was just a few years ago. And so, yeah, the fundraising landscape has changed because everybody's brains have changed. We are more distracted than ever. We are more online than ever. We are outpacing every economic forecast for Black Friday, even in an air quotes bad economy, even with inflation, right? We are just absolutely blowing numbers out of the water. We're seeing a ton of growth in startups. We're seeing a ton of growth online in e-com. And it's like, okay, well, what do we want to do about that? Because your ideal donors and prospects and volunteers, they're online and they're spending money. They're just not online and spending money with your organization yet. So to get their attention, you cannot do what you did 5 years ago. You definitely can't do what you did 10 years ago. And I would argue you can't do what you did last year. Like you can't. Even last year. So I'm in the States. So, we've got an election cycle. You may have heard about it. And even post-election, the social landscape, everything is going to be so noisy. It's been so noisy leading up to it. So you cannot just replicate last year's playbook just because there's just more noise out there. So it's going to take more creativity, more innovation, more a frequent cadence to stand out online and in person to get people's attention, right? I ran into a friend, a parent yesterday, picking up my daughter, and I looked at her and I go, I owe you an RSVP. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like the kid's birthday party thing. I haven't RSVP'd for, and she sent me 3 messages, and just seeing her face, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, right? It's not because I don't want to take my daughter to the birthday party. It's not because I don't like her. I'm distracted. I forgot.
I thought it was just me. I'm getting older. I'm getting more forgetful.
Nope.
So yeah, I mean, it makes sense that we are more distracted. Our attention is divided more now, definitely more than ever before. Social media definitely didn't help with that.
Yeah.
And all these shorts and stuff like that. So I think that's a good call out to say that, maybe you as an organization, as a nonprofit, you haven't really changed, or you don't, or not the same as a for-profit company. But the idea is you have to understand who your not buyers are, but who your donors are. And if they're changing, you have to
Yeah.
adapt with them. It's not just well, we're who we are, and we don't need to adapt to the market. It's you have to pay attention to the market and to the general public and see what they're doing and then adapt accordingly. And if you don't, you become a dinosaur.
And I want to offer, like, it's uncomfortable to change
Mm.
because never have I ever had a client, worked with an executive director, worked with a development director, marketer, and they said, okay, we're going to change how often we email our database. We're going to change our stories to be a little less formal and a little more personal. And never have I ever heard, our board thinks this is a great idea. My boss thinks this is the best thing ever. You're never going to get 100% buy-in when you make change. And somehow, some reason in the nonprofit world, I guess because of all the board voting, we think we need 100% buy-in. Everybody thinks it has to be a great idea. And that is the part of me that I'm like, can we please steal a page from the for-profit book, please? Where they're like, you know what? Let's just try it. Let's just see. Bombas, the sock maker, they'll email me once a day, right? They're like, they can talk about socks 7 days a week for what? A $15 pair of socks, which by the way, they're an amazing sock and they have a give back model. I'm happy to do it. But I'm not mad at them. But I know 10 out of 10 nonprofits would be, Christina, we would never email. And I'm not saying you have to copy them, but I want to say, like, I wonder why their business is growing and thriving so well in this market, right? And they're also they're memorable emails. They're not so formal. And it's not just email, it's social, it's everywhere. So I wonder what we could do to, like, take a page from that book.
Changes can always be scary, but I think it's a mindset thing as well too. If you embrace change, if you say, listen, in order to stay viable, you have to change. Like technology is forcing
Mm-hmm.
change upon us. And if, again, we don't compete or in our own way, become dinosaurs, we'll be left behind. We won't be relevant anymore, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So I think to help combat that, just agreeing and deciding, maybe deciding and
Mm-hmm.
then agreeing, but
Mm-hmm.
a change is necessary. It's important. It's not an evil thing. And you're right. I
Mm-hmm.
think this is a temporary trial, right? We're going to try this out. If it works,
Yeah,
great. We'll stick with it. If it doesn't, we can pivot a little bit and try something else. But
that's right.
staying stationary, I mean, at a physical level, life is movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without movement, there's no life. So you have to move. You have to keep on moving. You have to keep on adapting. You can't
Yeah.
just stay still.
I mean, it's like, and I always tell my clients this, like, I'm the guinea pig. Everything I'm telling you to do, I'm doing a version of myself. So, have I ever received an email from somebody who's like, you send too many emails, or they're mad about it? I'm like, of course, it doesn't feel good. But is it worth it to me to get one grumpy email so I can help 10 organizations who are like, oh my God, thank you. I hadn't tried it this way. Thank you for this template. I hadn't thought of it before. And it's the same way. It's like, is it worth one subscriber being like, you send too many emails, I didn't like that, for 10 new donations, for 10 lapsed donors to re-engage? Like, I'm all in for that. I just want to offer that it's a both. It's a both. Like, it feels stretchy and expansive. And sometimes you get a grumpy person along the way. And it's like, that's part of the deal. Nike is not mad when somebody is like, why'd you email me again? Why are you telling me about your new sneaker drop? And they're just like, cool, people are excited about our new sneaker drop. We're going to tell as many people as many times as it takes.
Just like you can't get 100% agreement from your board, you can't make 100% of people happy.
That's
You're
right.
always going to annoy someone.
Yeah.
So if you, as long as it's not overwhelming and it's the majority
Correct.
of people,
Yes.
like it's okay to have a bit of this noise in the sense that at least it's also feedback too. If they're complaining, if they didn't care,
Mm-hmm.
they would just unsubscribe and not say a single thing. The fact that they complain could be a positive sign.
Yeah, I haven't shared this yet, but I'm kind of doing my own little, like, case study. So on my podcast, I have this whole series that's on monthly giving, and I decided to join 3 different monthly giving programs as I was just exploring this. And I had 3 that were on my radar anyway, and I was like, now's the perfect time. And I joined a really big one, like a big organization, big brand name. I joined a small but established organization, maybe around a million. And then I joined, or right under a million, I say. And then I joined an organization as a monthly donor that is, I don't know where they're at. I would say they're around 3 to 5 million a year in revenue. Okay. So like giant, giant, mid, small. And that's just how it worked out with my own preferences. And of the three, did you hear me pause? Because I had to be like, wait, only one of them do I remember that I joined. And this has been months now because only one of them is like telling me what the heck they do, why it matters, sharing case studies. It's not because I'm worried about being thanked. I'm pretty sure they all sent me thank yous. That's not it. But one of them is remaining uber top of mind for me because their frequency is 10x the other two. Like it is so, and frequency for me is email. I think they text me too, and that's fine. I think they actually called me and I was like, I don't want to call. That's okay. But their voice is 10x louder than the other two that I have to remember. Who am I giving? What was the other two? And I've had similar instances before. So it's like, oh, what's the value there of them just turning up the volume to 10, right? Maybe they have a couple of donors who are like, that's a lot, but they can just opt out of that, right? And still support your organization. But now if I think about the organizations that matter to me that I support, that one that 10x, they're top of mind for me, for sure.
Play devil's advocate for a second. Is there you say 10x? I mean, is there a dial setting that's too high? Like, I imagine if they contact you every hour, you would say, hang on a second, is there like daily I can understand? I mean, I have in my own newsletter, I call it an email list that I do it 5 days a week. And people unsubscribe and that's fine, no problem. It's not for everybody, but I keep it relevant, short, sweet, full of information. So, and I imagine can every nonprofit or should every nonprofit do something similar, 10xing their thing? Or is there also a formula to say, if this, then this, like the decision tree to tell you what your optimal performance is, which may not be 10x, might be 5x, but at least it's more. But then you want to make sure you don't go overboard or underboard. Like there must be a happy nominal middle.
That's right. No, I like this question. I like the way you're thinking too. And what wouldn't be smart is if you're emailing, for example, let's just talk about email for this. If you're emailing once a quarter and then you're like, all right, every day, people buckle up, here we go. That's not going to work, right? So for example, once a quarter is definitely not enough. Once a month is not enough. I would argue maybe 5-10 years ago, you could do a monthly update. Not anymore. So I like my clients to be emailing at least every 2 weeks as a minimum, but really once a week. And so when you say how much is too much, I teach a campaign kind of launch process that will, if you can picture like an incline. So it like has a peak and then a cool down, almost like you would on a treadmill, right? Where you like
a bell
do a
curve,
cool down. Thank you. Yeah, you can't see me. I'm making the motion, right? So you ramp up when you're fundraising and then you cool down. And that's how you give your audience a break and, you're off the gas, so to speak. But there does need to be a minimum baseline of communicating with your donors online and your subscribers, the people who have not yet done anything, right? That is not once a month. Because we're going to forget about you. And I would say the 2 organizations that I donated to that are not emailing so much are maybe they're emailing once a month, but I will tell you, it feels like they're emailing once every 2 months because that's how back of mind they are for me. I'm like, I don't know the last time I heard from them.
And so once a week, that makes total sense. Minimum, you said even, but is there like, would it be a blanket statement to say everybody should be doing at least once a week? Or is there, yes, except if you are here and then maybe you shouldn't, and then consider this instead?
Well, I mean, if there's some unique circumstance, maybe it makes sense to take a break. That's totally fine. But I think a good minimum baseline is once a week. So, and that's what I would teach. I want to give like a huge asterisk, a huge caveat of once a week and your emails are super boring and impersonal and sound like they're from an ominous brand. Don't worry about it. Like go ahead and take it off the list. So once a week is like, oh, I'm getting to actually know you. I'm getting to know the people in around your organization. I'm getting to know maybe social proof or testimonials or something exciting or valuable or a little nugget. Like if they're that, then once a week. But if it's called fall update, don't bother.
You mentioned you were advising one nonprofit to change their tone, or you mentioned at least one nonprofit changing their tone from a more formal to more informal. So, would that be one way that you would recommend to connect more with people? Because if they're all distracted, and you're just saying, as a fall update, it's quite bland. Maybe it was written by
Yep.
ChatGPT or something like that. Like, are there any tips or tricks or considerations for when you're writing these kinds of emails to make sure that they're spicy enough that they're memorable?
Yeah, I think 9 out of 10 nonprofits, this is your work. And so you're not alone if you're like, I think ours might be boring. Totally fine. I think that's how you were brought up, how you were taught. That was the culture of the organization. This is how we do it. Safe. Let's not ruffle any feathers. You don't have to be polarizing, but in order for it to be sticky, for people to actually feel resonant with your message, you have to say something that is not what the other nonprofit. So if you're, a cat rescue here in Atlanta, please don't send an email that could come from any cat rescue in Atlanta. There's more than one. So what is your voice? Maybe you want to start to cultivate that. That's going to be more interesting to me. So yours could be literally yours, the executive director. Yours could be your programs. You can change around the voices. So letting people have control versus an ominous brand voice is really, really important for organizations to get that loyalty, to get that resonance.
Mentioned, yeah, polarizing. It should not be polarizing, but we know, especially you mentioned politics,
Yeah.
that
Yep.
confrontation does create engagement. Like that's a known
Mm-hmm.
fact. So sometimes people provoke engagement
Mm-hmm.
by doing more confrontational stuff. Is that something that you
Mm-hmm.
would say should be always off the table, or is there some silver lining, some positive outcome from it that people can use as long as there's maybe asterisks and warning signs everywhere, so you don't go too far? Like, how far deep should you go in that direction?
Yeah, the reason why I say not polarizing, because I think sometimes people misinterpret when I'm talking about like, what is your truth? What is the truth? What's important to you? What's important to the organization? They're like, oh, well, do you want me to like piss off donors? Do we curse on this podcast? Do we want me to make donors mad? And I'm like, no, it's not about that. You don't have to get political if you're not political. It's just about saying, like getting me in the room, talking to me about how you put the 104th person on the wait list for your service and what that feels like, or how like something that is actually true and not so formulaic. So that's what I mean on that piece. However, if it does make sense for you to say, you know what, we treat women's health, that's part of our programming here, and we want to make it absolutely clear we are not for this ban on abortions, right? You can, if that makes sense for you, go forth. I support you and make drawing those lines in the sand. If not, that's okay. So you don't want to just be polarizing or just like, I'm gonna, drop a bomb on the Thanksgiving table so everybody can, the crazy uncle. That's not it. But people will start to resonate when you're being more specific. Like there's an organization I work with, Cat Rescue, so maybe that's why it's on my mind. And they're like the only cat rescue that takes in senior and disabled cats, which is like super niche, right, in their area. And I'm like, that's their moment. That's a very special angle to be like, yeah, they literally get turned away from other shelters. I'm like, that's something that they need to repeat and repeat and repeat and talk about. That separates them. And they can talk about that in a way that is like, there aren't others. I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have known that you couldn't take a senior cat. I don't know, and so like really educating people on the negative stakes is how Storybrand would say it. Like, what's the negative stakes here? What are we missing without this shelter? Can be helpful.
Oh, that's a really good way. Yeah. And I imagine these kinds of things happen or can happen in a brainstorming session, right? You take time aside as a group, maybe you get some outside help along the way as well to offer some new perspective on things. But then to help define that voice that is, I don't want to say truly unique, but at least more unique, more you than, like, I like the idea of saying that if this email could be sent by any other animal shelter, then you're doing it wrong. There has to be, there was somebody else said something similar in the service business. If it can be written by your grandmother, then you're writing the wrong email kind of thing. You need to have your little voice. So do you have any tips for this? Any ways of helping draw out that voice or considerations to say, here's maybe ways you can help define what that is?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have an entire course on this inside my coaching program. So that's why. And like I said, I put myself through this because I used to, number one, I used to think that I was not a good writer, a good storyteller. So the first step I had to do was drop that story because it wasn't true. It was just like, I just didn't think I was good at it. And so I just kept saying that to myself. So guess what? It made it very hard to write. Step one, drop the story that it's hard or that you're not good at it. Step two, I started writing emails. They were like very consultant-y. They weren't very special. So I was like, okay, I have to break the fourth wall. Okay. I have to start letting people in on me. I'm pretty private when it comes to like, I'm not the person who's going to share my kids' pictures on, whatever. But what I did start doing is just weaving that in my emails a little bit, like a little thing about how like we mess up. It took me 11 reminders before I ordered my daughter's school pictures. They were the best school pictures. They put a little fake pumpkin on top of her head. It was so funny. My intention was always to order the pictures. I remember we were talking about distracted. I just didn't. And so I was grateful for the texts and the email reminders because it got me to take action, right? And then, I parlay that into fundraising, right? And so that's how I started to like really break down, like break the fourth wall and start getting a little bit more personal. The biggest tip that I have for you is that I wrote somebody an email yesterday. I was teaching a webinar this week, and the webinar went for like 2 hours. The chat was awesome. And I was going back through the chat transcript and I noticed that I didn't answer a couple questions that like got buried, in the chat. And one of them was a really good question. So I wrote this executive director an email and I put in the subject line, saw your question in the chat, forgot, or something like that. And I wrote her an email and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to make sure I answered this question. And so I put her question back and I answered it. The way that I wrote that is how you should write your emails to your subscribers. I will take that whole email and I will put it out to my whole list. And my subject line for that was like, just saw your question in the chat. Here's the answer. Instead of 3 ways to blah, blah, blah today. You know what we do, or the nonprofit version would be like, did you know, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not how two people talk to each other. So if you start writing your emails, and this is when I say emails, you can sub out emails for direct mail appeal letters, fundraising letters, by the way. Write them like you would to one person. And I actually like to write to my best, most excited client or customer. So I would do that to your like, who's the donor that is always happy to hear from you? Because when we think I'm bugging people or I already wrote this, they already know about it, that's a crappier email or crappier fundraising letter. So, and for me too, if I'm like, oh my God, I've already told them about this webinar, they don't want to hear it. That's not going to be the same email that I would write or the same energy behind the email where I'm like, oh, I know I got a lot of audit offices last week. I know people are just back into the office. I'm going to give them another email. Like, I know Susan's back in the office. Let me write her an email. Like, that's a different energy. So sometimes really drilling into like, who's one person that I can think of when I'm writing this.
And as somebody, like you said, not just someone, but someone who's either a best friend or excited donor, someone, because your tone will be different. If you mentally picture this person, writing to this person, your tone will be different. There's always a balance between, so my high school English teacher was like a very strict, like I learned the Oxford comma and like all these kinds of things.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So like she would always say that speaking and written, of course, are two different ways of doing grammar. One is obviously more formal than the other. And I've noticed a lot of people these days, when they do speak, it's a lot less formal than even before.
Correct.
Like they use the word so very often, like a lot of people start the sentences with so these days, I've noticed. I don't know why that is, but like, is there you don't want to be too casual that you're chummy bummy, like it's your best friend and you have your inner jargon and dialect. But I imagine you want to be comfortable enough that you would be, able to share it. Everyone would be able to understand. So I guess my question is, how do you make sure that the tone isn't too casual or too informal and it's just the right setting?
Yeah. So you want to have some guardrails. So like I have a brand voice template. That's an easy way to do it. Of like, you want to have some guardrails of like, okay, what are our values? What are our buzzwords? What do we talk about? What don't we talk about? Like as a brand to help you have some guardrails. But what I want to say is the way that we learned it, because I think I was didn't learn the Oxford comma, which I'm very pro Oxford comma, but it was very formulaic, the 5 paragraph essay, and is that's not this. That's not marketing and that's not fundraising. Okay. It shouldn't be AP style press release. What you're saying, and that's one of the things I say to my clients all the time. I'm like, this is not that. This is not a published book. This is not going in a journal. This is not AP style press release. Sound like you, because the average person, if you send me something that looks like the 5 paragraph essay that's written perfect, I don't want to read it. I'm bored, right? I'm a skimmer. I want it to like move. And so sometimes, so my husband went to school and he has an English degree, and I will print out something, physically print it out, and I will look at him and I will say, grammar only. Look at this for grammar only. I don't want you to talk to me about syntax, messaging, copy, nada. Because if he'll redline it, right? But I'm like, you're taking the guts out, you're taking the emotion out, because that's not what we're looking for here. So sometimes I'm only looking for, is there a typo I missed, or a there or there is misspelled, right? That didn't catch. So we don't want it to be perfect. You can start a sentence with and, you can start a sentence with but, comma, so that often too is like that informality will build trust, because people are like, oh, there's a human behind here, not just an ominous brand.
And this might sound a bit more, not controversial, but odd. So I heard somewhere back in the day that when people swear, they're actually
Uh-huh.
perceived to be more trustworthy. It's like a certain inverse relationship where, if you're swearing,
Yeah.
it's because you're just honest. You're not holding back in any way. Is
Uh-huh.
there any room for profanity in these kinds of things to be able to unlock that possibility, or is
That's
that
a
just
okay. That's such a good question. That would be go in your brand voice. So, for example, your brand voice would decide what words, if you serve people with intellectual disabilities, there are words you don't use anymore.
mm,
There are words you might use. There are words. So, like that would be a great place to establish that piece, and that's what's coming to mind. As far as swearing and curse words, you as an organization would have to decide. I'm not sure that there's a place for that in written form. It would have to be, I don't know. Maybe there's a use case for it, but I would say across the board, probably not. But I think what you're saying is is the idea that I had a guest on my podcast who she's raised $2 million. She's a B Corp. And one of the things I just keep thinking about that she said with me, she said, Christina, vulnerability is like catnip. So we were talking about fundraising. And I was like, oh, that's so good. But I love her so much. I know her personally. She's a friend. And she did not mean that from an extractionary way of like, all you have to do is be vulnerable and people will give you money. That wasn't it. What she was saying is, when you talk human to human, when you show the humanity of you, your purpose, your mission, it is resonant. So it makes sense to me that if somebody drops the F bomb, people are like, oh, she's somebody who's like real in that way, or that's her style, or she's not, being so perfect. And so it's resonant with people. And so there's a
mm.
way that you can be vulnerable without being like rash, crass, unless that's your style, then like I do you, I guess.
No, but I think that's a really good call out in that it's the same underlying principle. It's being vulnerable, it's being real, it's being human. Yes, some people use profanity, but you don't have to. You can leverage the ability of sharing. Like this time,
Yeah.
this week wasn't our greatest week because we lost somebody, or our donations were down, or da da
Yes.
da. And just being transparent with your moment, I think, can be very powerful. I think that's the really the
I'm
powerful message.
I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of organizations, when they don't meet their goal, they go quietly into the night. And, they've been sending the emails and doing the campaigns online and doing the things. They don't meet their goal. And they're like, I'm not going to talk about it. And what I want you to do is I want you to write the email where you're like, we didn't meet our goal yet. Okay. I want to get the email where you're like, yeah, I thought we would get 100 donors. We got 50. Here's, and like go there, because there are people like me who, speaking to the sort of hero story, like I find it so fun to help people get across the finish line. So it might not be the donor who is the donor who, gets you on the leaderboard for your fundraiser. But if you write me an email and you're like, we're $1,000 away, that's, 10 people at 100. I'm like, put me in, coach. That's fun. That's exciting for me. So different donors, different motivations. So write the email that says we didn't make it yet.
Are there any other words like specific words? Because like you said, top 10 ways, and there's some words you said
Hmm.
for sure are really bad ideas if it's written by, or it could be written by AP or your grandmother, really. But are there
Yeah.
certain words today, and they may not be valid tomorrow, but today, are there certain words that we know cause like that tone? There's a difference here between the tone of the word and the voice and the actual words. But if you had like are there certain scripts or templates that people can use to reach better, more
Hmm.
resonate more, and then maybe even have like in my newsletter, for example, I write, listen, if someone forwarded you this email, that's great. But if you want to get it straight from the source, here you can subscribe, with the idea that hopefully some of my readers are forwarding my emails to other people. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's true, but at least that kind of message is there for that purpose. Is there something similar or that nonprofits can do to try to encourage not just the spreading of their message to other people, but also to connect more using those specific words?
Yeah, I would say what comes to mind is like the calls to action. So the like donate calls. I really personally am just so tired of make a difference. Make a difference is just, I'm like, So if you find yourself writing make a difference, I want you to finish a sentence and pretend you're talking to me. Make a difference, why? Like, and I'm like, make a difference, how? How? Like, finish the thought, and maybe that will help you get out of it. The other piece is if you can just add urgency in any of your writing, that's going to help. So urgency is like today, now. It's more specific to like answering the question. And this would be a good prompt to write an email with, which is like, why should I donate today? Like, oh, okay, well, it's November. Can I just donate in like February? I'm sure all of you listening are like, no, this is your end. You have to, like, okay, but why? Like the average donor doesn't know the difference really to you between donating now or in a couple of months. So answer that question, like, what changes if I donate today? Write that email.
As a technologist, I'm always interested in knowing about how AI these days influences various parts of the nonprofit space. And I'm curious to know, in all of these conversations, or in this conversation about all these topics, I should say, how has AI impacted things? Is it, I know that, people use it for writing certain things or getting ideas. How have
Mhm.
you seen AI being used in addition to that, or in relation to that?
Yeah, I think it's really, really helpful. It's so wild to think like, was it a year ago where I was like, what is this chat GPT thing? I mean, maybe it was longer. I don't know. And then in 30 days, I was like, this is the best thing I've ever had. I will have the paid account. Like, it's so fun. For me, I think of it as my third assistant. So I workshop with it. I'm like, I help download and I'm organize my thoughts or notes or debrief, or if I have an idea for an email or I need the name of a thing, we'll workshop it together. I always override it. It is not the CEO. It is not the best idea. It is helping me workshop my own ideas. So that's the caveat there. I also override Grammarly too. So like there are times where like, nope, we are breaking the grammar rules here. So I love it. I think it's great. I have a client in my coaching program who loves Gemini, which I think is the Google version,
Google, yeah.
Microsoft. Google. Yeah, okay. And she uses it all the time to help her develop her fundraising stories, the names of her fundraisers, helps her workshop her emails. And then she'll go in for feedback. And what we do is we kind of just streamline it. And I find it really, really helpful. So it is there to help you buy your time back. The difference is you have to make sure, again, you're not ending up with something so generic because it's giving you the email and the fundraising page for any nonprofit in any town USA who serves the homeless population. Like, that's not going to be resonant. That's not going to be personal. That's not going to work. So you want to make sure it like still goes through that lens there. But I find it to be
Awesome.
very, very helpful. Yeah,
Yeah. Yep. I agree. It can be used for new ideas and for first drafts, but definitely not copy paste material.
that's right. You are the overrider. The human overrides. Yes, yes.
Cool. Well, I think this is a great place to leave it. I was hoping then you could share with people. You mentioned you have a podcast. Obviously, you have various training materials, webinars, and so forth. If you can share that with people so they can get in touch with you, that would be great.
Yeah. The podcast is the Purpose and Profit Club podcast. And where else? You can find me at Splendid Consulting on Instagram and go to splendidatl.com, splendidatl.com. That's my website. On there, there's lots of free resources, trainings, webinars, all the things.
Awesome. We'll put all those in the show notes as well. So, Christina, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you for having me. You asked great questions. You could tell you got me fired up.
The pleasure was mine. All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.